Well, thank you, Memorial Spring Branch Club. I really appreciate the invite to present. I know it's kind of hard, but I have to stand somewhere to be able to move these forward. So yes, I joined Westview Club in 2016, and I am super excited to be here. So I will do the next one. All right, what is hemp? There is actually a legal definition of hemp, and it's this legal definition that helps people make the difference between what you are supposed to have and not supposed to have, either growing or consuming. So cannabis sativa L, that L is important, is what is hemp, and it is the cousin of what they call the more scandalous cannabis, also known as marijuana. And so the definition that was set federally that Texas then followed is that hemp is from the cannabis plant, but never contains more than what's called 0.3% THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, by dry weight. And so there are a series of tests that are done along the way, from while the plant is growing, as it's being harvested, post-harvest, what it's being made into, and those items as well. But that 0.3% by dry weight is a very important number in many ways. So what can you make with it? A lot of things. Hemp has been used for at least 5,000 years in historic record, and they believe longer by some of the fossil impressions that they have found of different materials. But fiber, clothing, my skirt is made of hemp, my necklace is made of hemp. And I brought a variety of different things for you to see so that you can understand how versatile of a plant this really is. What was very special to us is at the start of the pandemic, we, with a bunch of other Rotarians, actually started making a lot of mask covers to help those in the healthcare field who were short on PPE and help to extend the life of that. And we were honored to be able to make a large volume of them for the COVID task force in the ICU at the VA hospital. And we had no idea, but they posted this beautiful little thank you with all of the nurses there for that. So we're very grateful for that. But you can make oils for lubricants, biofuels out of it. It's amazing all of the different things that you can make from hemp. And so it's one of the reasons that I love this material, because I love things that aren't just useful for one thing, that are, you know, you can do a ton of things with it. And so the current legal status is, we had the Farm Bill in 2014, which created a pilot program, and then in 2018 was fully rolled out. And this descheduled, if you know anything about medicine, you have drugs that are based on a schedule. It descheduled hemp and separated it from marijuana. And so when they did that, they created literally a whole new potential industry here stateside. And so we are now excited to have access to this plant in a way that we haven't had since 1937, when it was unfortunately classified with marijuana and outlawed for growth and consumption. So they did do a little Hemp for Victory campaign during World War II, for those of you who may have come across those ads, because we were not able to get hemp from the Philippines, which is where we were getting a lot of our raw fiber from due to the war in the Pacific Theater. And so hence the need for ropes and sails still in smaller Navy vessels. So 2019, as if you all probably are legislatively active or advocate for things, but Texas legislature only meets once every 2 years, and it's on odd numbered years. And so federal law was 2018, Texas was 2019, when they actually made it legal for us to grow, process, sell, use all of these things related to hemp, provided that the plant and the process don't go above 0.3% THC by dry weight. So what is CBD? A lot of people ask that. Well, CBD is short for cannabidiol, which a lot of people, this is like, who wants to have to say that word all the time? So It is one of hundreds, I believe there's 117 that have been identified so far, specifically of components of the plant called cannabinoids. And so these components kind of show up in different ways, but there are two major cannabinoids, and then all the others are considered minor or novel. And the major ones are THC, delta-9 THC, which everybody knows is what gives you that psycho response of the heady high, sometimes the bodily release as well, but for more, it has to do with a heady experience. CBD, or cannabidiol, is the secondary component that has a lot of other really interesting potential health benefits and interactions. So the interesting thing about all plants really, but cannabis can be engineered just like all other botanicals to have very specific ratios of things. Last weekend, I spent the weekend in College Station at Texas A&M. Believe it or not, they hosted our first Texas Cannabis Policy Conference on the grounds of A&M because they actually have a hemp program there. It is in its pilot year, and they are super excited about it. They've already got a student group set up for how they communicate the information with everybody else on campus, but to have that happening at Texas A&M is huge because there are still some barriers to studying cannabinoids, and any major university could potentially risk loss of federal funding if they are studying cannabis in a way that the feds believe is not aligned with only the hemp guidelines. And so we are really appreciative. I also love it because College Station's what, half an hour from Hempstead, and so Hempstead, Texas. What a lot of people don't realize is that Texas was the largest producer and exporter of hemp prior to criminalization in the 1930s. We had an extraordinary hemp industry here, and I would love to see that come back. So why does CBD and THC, why do they work? What do they do? Well, we're vertebrates as well as our furry friends a lot of times. And if you are a vertebrate, you have what is called an endocannabinoid system. And that system has a series of receptors on it. And so this is the poster that I have up at the store. It's my favorite poster. And when people come into the store and we're talking, I encourage them to take a picture of it because it really helps explain some things. Along
Can you email this presentation?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. I know that the room setup's a little challenging. But the CB1 receptors, which on this poster are the brown dots, those are the receptors that are most responsive to THC, and that's why you see so many of them in the head and then distributed along the nervous system path. Whereas the green dots, the CB2, those are the ones that are actually responding to CBD and the other novel or minor cannabinoids. And you'll notice that they're in different parts of the system, but they reside quite heavily in our central organs. And so what we are seeing is a lot of folks with Crohn's and colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, and other GI challenges trying CBD preparations because there may be some potential uses for that. And so how does it work? Well, without like being extremely nerdy and scientific, those receptors are basically like locks along a path, and the cannabinoids come in like a key and they actually open up the lock. And what it does is it allows that system to be more responsive and be less irritated. And the best way that I can say this is that it's basically like being hangry, and you know you're really irritated and grouchy when you haven't had food and all of that, and then you have food and then it satiates you and it fills things and you're not quite so hangry. It's kind of the same thing in the sense that when the sensors are triggered, it releases a lot of the irritation that some people have with tissue inflammation, or in the case of the CB1 with the THC with the nerves. And so that is how they sort of communicate. So it is not a pharmaceutical that is coming in intending to treat or overlay. It is a naturally occurring substance from a plant that simply plugs into a system of ours that hasn't really been in use since the 1930s when we removed access to this. And the reason for that is there was a time prior to criminalization where a lot of the hemp leftovers from the field were fed to the farm animals. It was in their bedding, it was in their food, there was all of this. And so because we then drank that milk, ate those cows, pigs, goats, whatever, we were getting a different type of input into our bodies. So we were getting cannabinoids beforehand. And so this is the really interesting thing. And we're seeing, especially with like animal sciences, they want to study it a little bit more, but then you got these folks who are like, well, animals have been eating cannabis and hemp products since we've been domesticating or in some way, shepherding them, and we didn't have problems from that. So I understand and appreciate that they want to study it a little bit more, but as it is right now in Texas and several other states, cannot be used in animal feed or bedding, but they are doing some studies to see if that will potentially be allowed soon. So if you go to a CBD store, you go to a place and you're like, yeah, I want to learn more about it. There are some things that you need to understand about cannabinoids. When they are distilled in the lab and put into products, they can be distilled in different ways. You can isolate components or you can have all of the components. And so that is the difference between what is called full spectrum CBD or isolate CBD. Full spectrum CBD simply means it contains all of the cannabinoids that that plant had at the time of distillation. It contains all of them, which means it could have that legal 0.3% THC in it because it has not specifically been removed. That's important because every single person's liver metabolizes at a different rate. And if you are taking full spectrum CBD and you have slow metabolism, there is a possibility that you could get enough buildup in there that if you are subject to drug screening for any reason, whether it's for VA benefits or for jobs or anything like that, there is a possibility that you would test what is called hot, where you would be showing to have THC in your system, even though you have never broken the law and you have only consumed these products. This is an issue that's currently being addressed. I think the Transportation Authority is trying to figure out a better way to do this because we are losing a lot of quality truck drivers who are testing hot, but they're taking CBD products, but they took full spectrum CBD instead of isolate. And so that's a little bit problematic. And so I think they're trying to work on that. But this is something that it needs to be understood. If you are subject to drug testing, do not buy full spectrum CBD. You really want isolate. You will sometimes find broad spectrum. And broad spectrum means that the THC has been removed, but it still has the other cannabinoids with it to kind of help with some of those processes. Yes, we do.
What about international travel?
International travel, I think that we can see from what's happening with Ms. Greiner right now that I would not recommend taking anything across country lines because there are still many countries that CBD is still not allowed. And I would not recommend running that risk unless you say purchase a fine chocolate, right? So there are chocolates available that have CBD, some THC as well. You could take that chocolate and maybe make yourself some cookies or put it in some kind of a trail mix or something where it's simply part of another prepared food. I don't eat meat, and so when I travel, a lot of times I have my own snack pack of food just to make sure that I get good protein while I'm traveling. I've never had a problem internationally with them trying to go through my food and be like, hey, what's in here? But I would not travel with something that in any way says that there's cannabinoids in it, because there are so many countries where this is still a no-no. Yeah. So yes, that's the breakdown and difference between
So
the isolate.
basically, if you have someone that is, their company does random drug screening or something like that,
Yes.
but they may want to try whether they have anxiety or maybe muscle or back pains. So a broad spectrum CBD might, or some kind of product with a broad spectrum CBD might potentially help.
Broad might be more helpful because it would have some more cannabinoids, but it doesn't have the THC in it. So broad or isolate only. Because that way the THC has been removed, and I can show you how to look for that at the end. Yes.
If you can get the isolate version of it, why would people purchase the full spectrum or broad spectrum rather than the isolate?
Great question. So the plant has all of these components in it for a reason. They're partners and they work together. Some people refer to it as an entourage effect. Entourage is not a scientific term, and therefore a lot of people who do studies don't like the term, but essentially it is all of the other cannabinoids present in that plant work together with CBD, and they respond differently. Most specifically for our patrons with nerve damage. Nerve damage responds to THC more than CBD. And that is why full spectrum for people with nerve damage is so important, because that tiny little bit of THC makes the CBD last longer and be more effective. Yeah, great question. Yes.
So you mentioned the gastric system.
Yes.
So what would you recommend, full spectrum or isolate, or what's the other one?
So there's full spectrum, isolate, and broad spectrum.
Broad.
So the broad and the isolate are 0 THC, and the full may have up to that 0.3%. I'm a fan of full spectrum because I really feel that those components help each out a lot more. Yes, ma'am. And so when we talk about what is CBD used for, I'm not a physician. I'm not here to tell you that it's used for anything medically, but I can tell you what I use it for, what my family have used it for, and why our success meant that I opened the store. So I had a torn labrum. They wanted to do surgery. Surgeon said, we can't do surgery until you unfreeze your shoulder. It was frozen and it was in a lot of pain, and I had very limited range of motion. And so I had to go through physical therapy in order to unfreeze it before they would be willing to do surgery. And the pain was excruciating. And so I started using CBD topical, because that was the only thing I had been introduced to at the time. And within 2 weeks, not only was the pain gone for me, but I had full range of motion back. Like I was having to have help put my clothes on because I couldn't actually raise my arm up and do, normal things. And so that is what brought me to it. My late mother, she had fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis, as well as many gastric problems. And so going to kind of answer your question, what the approach that we used with her was a full spectrum approach, because she had multiple system challenges. And what we find too is that a lot of times the gut and the brain health, there's a real cycle in here. And so that's what we did for her. And we did a mixture of ingestibles and topicals. I will say this, the ingestibles can be a little challenging for some people with GI issues, because sometimes the carrier oils, it's a medium chain triglyceride, and it's usually a coconut oil base. If people are intolerant to some of the carrier oils, that can make it a little bit more challenging as far as the delivery mechanism. So
they have different types of oils. Like I know my daughter will drink a lot of coconut stuff because of her leaky gut. Well, now she hardly has any leaky gut.
Yes.
But what other types of delivery oils if someone's allergic to the coconut or intolerant?
Some people will use a vegetable glycerin base for it. And so it just depends on what people's own personal sensitivities are. And so what I will say is that CBD is not a fix for everything, and it does not work for some people. Cannabinoids bind to fat. They love fat. So if you are a marathoner with 2% body fat, you don't have a lot of fat in order for the cannabinoids to bind into. And so you may not really get the same impact and experience as people who have enough fat that allow those cannabinoids to bind more quickly and stay in the system longer. So that's something. Number two, I always recommend that if you have not tried CBD products before, please chat with us about what you're interested in trying it for so that we can provide you with the research papers that we have downloaded from the National Institute of Health. We've got hundreds of them, and we have organized them by bodily system. And we want you to take those papers to your primary care provider and have that conversation first. CBD is a known blood thinner. It's not significant, but it is enough that if you are on a Coumadin or a warfarin or some other type of blood thinner, that it could impact your INR reading and cause numbers that make it harder for your physician to dial in your dosing. And so you need to have a very honest conversation with them. What it did for me, some of you in the room have known me long enough to know I'm a stroke survivor. And so what it did for me is that it made it so that I do not personally have to be on pharmaceutical blood thinners because I use a consistent amount of CBD. And so post-stroke, I am cleared. And so that's only for me. I would never recommend that for anybody else without a very serious conversation with your physician, but also for blood pressure medications because it's known to slightly lower blood pressure. This is why some people, like in the old 60s days, people would smoke a joint and then they would pass out. They would pass out because their blood pressure would dip. So it's known to do that as a cannabinoid. And so that's another conversation that's really important with your physician. So this is why I don't like just like smoke shops and regular stores and all of that. Just so you know, we sell no smokables whatsoever in our space. My late father was a respiratory therapist, and I'm very conscientious of that. And so that is why we are only ingestibles and topicals. Secondarily, I get a lot of question about these, so I'm gonna address it before anybody asks. Delta 8, everybody wants to know what's up with this Delta 8. Delta 8 as a component is a naturally occurring component within the plant. It is not, however, synthesized at a high enough rate outside of the lab. In other words, it requires the lab in order for it to occur in a way that's actually volumetric enough to be used. I don't like Delta 8 and I will not sell it because a dear friend of mine is a neuroscientist at U of H and he's studied this a lot. The body produces a very specific chemical response when it interacts with that much Delta 8. That response has not yet been studied, and they are not happy with what they're seeing in preliminary sort of anecdotal evidence. So we need a lot more research on Delta 8 to understand what the body does in response to that in order for it to be okay. And so I'm not willing to sell that because I don't like those questions. Yes, sir.
Can you explain, I've seen, you drive down the street, and there's little stores that sell Delta 8, but is Delta 8 marketed as a kind of a legal version of
Delta 9?
THC or
Yes.
something like that?
So it is,
Yeah.
it is marketed in that way because the federal and Texas laws are very, very specific, and they only look at Delta 9 THC volume in the legal definition. So Delta 8, Delta 10, there are all sort of deltas that come off, and it's literally like one bond different in the chain when you look at the molecule.
Yeah.
And so the Delta 8 people, there's a huge thing. So we've had this little whiplash thing here in the state of Texas. Can you sell it? Can you not sell it? Legal, not legal, all of this sort of thing. From a technical basis, it is considered legal at the moment, but it probably will not stay that way. I would expect in the next round of legislation that we will see the FDA and the USDA try to address the challenges that have been happening in the state by state, because it's kind of a Wild West thing because each state has its own rules, right?
And does it, and I'm not into the marijuana or Delta 8 or anything, but does it supposedly give the same sensation as THC?
Supposedly, for some people, it gives the same as the Delta 9 THC, but you have to take so much of it to do that. That's what I'm concerned about, is the high volume of Delta 8 that you get to get to that response. Too much question for me. So that's why I'm uncomfortable with it. So for me, right now, Delta 8 does not pass the 4-way test, and so that's why I won't sell it. I'm not saying that other people can't, but I also, so if you don't know, I have a license with the State Board of Architecture. So I have to be extremely careful with what I do, because if I screw up over here, I could also lose my license with the State Board of Architecture, and that's a money gig, and I'm not doing that. So, if anybody here, farmers, ranchers, if you are interested in growing hemp, the Texas Department of Agriculture has a great website and has the industrial hemp program information there. Check it out. I would love nothing more than to visit with our farmers and ranchers. I did a presentation down in Alvin and some of the other places where they actually had folks there that wanted to learn about this. I would love to see some of our farmlands, especially cotton farms, converted back to hemp.
Where
Where
you have to have
feasible.
cotton farms and have it turned into a subdivision, but.
That is my next point, is let's find an option so that these families don't feel like selling to a developer is the only option, right? Let's find other ways. Hemp as an input crop takes a lot less water, about 1/6 of the amount of water that cotton requires. It is extremely pest resistant. So yes, there are certain pests that will like it, but it takes a fraction to none of the pesticides that are often used in other fibers for clothing, and you get a higher yield out of it per acre.
So it's kind of like a citronella or something, bugs don't want to mess with
It's
it.
why it smells like a skunk. That is the reason cannabis smells skunky. It's a deterrent. It's a natural deterrent, and that's the point. So, but yeah, definitely visit this website if you're interested in that. And that's the presentation. Any other questions?
Well, yeah.
Yes.
So is Hempstead, was it named because they farm hemp there?
That's what I'm trying to look up. I'm getting the Wi-Fi password, because you know I do the speech on Texas towns and how
No
it
way.
happens. But I don't remember.
Because we have
that.
Hempstead Highway, and I would think that, like, why would you name it hemp if you weren't some way connected to the industry? But that's the challenge, is
I don't remember if it was someone's name or if it.
pre-1930s.
I think it was between that and Marijuanaville.
Oh, I like it.
Cannabis port.
Cannabis port, I like that. I like that. Yes, sir.
You got a subdivision going now. See all those sweet names.
How long will this thing?
Excellent question. It depends on your body size, your fat content, and the volume that you're taking. So ingestibles take a little bit longer in order for you to feel them, because they have to go through the digestive system in order to be processed. But ingestibles stay with you the longest, which can be 6 to 8 hours, depending on how much you're taking, because you get the first synthesis of the cannabinoids in the digestive system through the blood, but then you get a secondary processing as it goes through the liver. And that is actually what makes the ingestibles last longer and be more powerful for people. That is why when folks who smoke it get immediate response, because it goes straight into the lungs and the crossing of the blood-brain barrier is very fast, but it's also gone in a fairly short amount of time, comparatively speaking to the ingestibles. Yes, sir.
What about the top?
The topicals, so topicals are interesting. They are what one would refer to as the least effective, in the sense that, you know, you're going through the skin, right? But it takes a lot longer for it to get into the full system, and you're using it at a point. And maybe what happens is sometimes people actually need it along a variety of different points.
It's like arthritis in your hand.
Exactly.
Your mom rubs it on the top.
Exactly. And so it can last for a couple of hours as well. But again, because it's not going through the liver or being synthesized in that way, it doesn't get that second boost that keeps it in there longer.
Kimberly.
Yes.
So to take a gummy, would that be more effective, say, for arthritis of the hand than the topical?
I like to do both. In all honesty, I have a regimen where in the morning and then in the evening, I like both a topical at certain points and the, you know, tincture or a tea in the evening. Some people like to drink it in tea and kind of help them relax at night with dessert.
Or the drops under the tongue. My mom's done it.
Drops under the tongue are faster than an ingestible, because sublingual, you know, you got a lot of opportunity for absorption in the mouth, which is why so many medicines are sublingual. And so that is faster than a full ingestible. Yes, sir.
Your address on West Alabama?
Yes, sir.
What's the cross street? What neighborhood is it?
Timmins. We're across from the Julius Melcher Post Office, West Alabama and Timmins. Yes. Yes. Yes, sir.
On the internet, I get all the advice.
Yes.
They work.
They can. Here's what I want to point out to you.
Show us some of your products that you have there.
What you need to look for when you are considering a CBD cannabinoid type product is, and on this one it's kind of small, and on this one it's a little bit bigger, the QR code. All right. If you go to a store and they have CBD products with no QR code, don't buy it. This is required. I'm sorry, what? Oh, sorry. Stop share.
People on Zoom can see.
Yes. Okay. That QR code should link you. It's a funny squiggly box. That QR code should take you to what is called the certificate of analysis, which is the lab report that tells you what is and is not in there. You want to know, this is how you confirm that if they tell you it doesn't have THC, that it doesn't have THC. This is also how you confirm that it doesn't have other things in there that you don't want, or that the milligrams that they're telling you on the label are really in the product, so that you don't get false advertising and you think you're getting a 3,000 milligram product and you're getting a 500. Yes, sir. Any other questions?
Any other?
Oh,
Last question, there's always, and I'm just doing something, there's always been this story that the Declaration of Independence or the US Constitution was written on hemp-based paper. Have you ever heard of that?
yes, sir. The drafts.
The draft.
The drafts. The final copy is not, but the drafts were. And so,
They didn't correct it, they didn't roll them up and smoked all of them.
so here's the thing, and one thing we didn't get to touch on. So I am a descendant of original Massachusetts Bay Colony settlers. We were required by law in the 16 and 1700s to grow hemp. It was just, that was part of the deal. And so my family were sailors and whalers. We used that hemp for those purposes. So what they believe is that the incidental volume of THC in the hemp that was largely grown was minorly medicinal, in the sense that they would boil the seeds in milk for certain pain, or they would use other things. But There's no documentation. It is not believed that it was widely used specifically as a euphoric type drug. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right.